December 7th, 1941, began like any other Sunday morning. The sun rose over Pearl Harbor, glinting off the calm waters, casting long shadows over the rows of battleships moored in the harbor. Sailors moved about their routines. Families wandered along the shores, and the day seemed ordinary, almost peaceful. Then the sky erupted in fire. Japanese aircraft streaked across the horizon with deadly precision. Explosions ripped through the harbor, engulfing ships in smoke and flames, while the shriek of machine gun fire echoed across the water. The United States, a nation that had long observed the world's wars from afar, was thrust into a violent reality it had not prepared for. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not merely a strike against battleships and airfields. It was a jolt that reverberated across the nation. For decades, the United States had maintained modest aircraft production, limited mostly to training planes and small defense models. Factories that had hummed with cars, radios, and tractors suddenly faced a new imperative. Produce planes, quickly, in massive quantities, and of sufficient quality to compete with a ruthless, battle-hardened enemy. The Pacific had become a battlefield, and Europe waited beyond the Atlantic, demanding attention on two fronts. There was no room for delay, no margin for error. The nation's survival now depended on how fast it could arm itself with wings. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's address to Congress the following day resonated with urgency and defiance. December 7th, 1941, would forever be a date etched in history. A date which will live in infamy, he declared. And the nation understood that war was no longer a distant threat. Factories would need to transform. Workers would need to endure long hours, sometimes around the clock, to meet the seemingly impossible demand. Ordinary citizens became extraordinary contributors to a war effort that would stretch across continents. Across Detroit, Los Angeles, Wichita, and other industrial hubs, assembly lines shifted from civilian products to aircraft components. Car chassis were removed, presses stamped fuselage parts, and massive sheets of aluminum were bent and riveted into wings. Men and women, many entering factories for the first time, adapted quickly. Women, in particular, became icons of resilience, mastering welding, riveting, and engine assembly with precision and speed. They became the faces of a workforce immortalized as Rosie the Riveter, symbols of determination and unity. Every rivet driven into an aircraft was more than a mechanical necessity. It was an act of defiance, a statement that America would fight back. The production effort was monumental. Factories ran day and night, often in 3 shifts, each worker contributing a small part to a massive whole. One plant in Willow Run, Michigan, alone, produced B-24 Liberators at a rate that astounded the world. At peak production, 1 aircraft left the line every hour. Engineers optimized assembly sequences, standardized parts were shipped to multiple factories, and millions of hands worked in unison to turn raw metal into tools of war. Each plane that rolled out was both a machine and a symbol, a testament to human ingenuity and the collective will of a nation determined to survive. Planes were not only built for American pilots. Under the Lend-Lease program, thousands were shipped across oceans to Britain, the Soviet Union, and China, ensuring that Allied forces could maintain pressure against Axis powers. Each crate carried more than machinery. It carried hope, strategy, and a promise that the world had not abandoned its fight against tyranny. The logistics alone were staggering. Aircraft were crated, shipped, assembled upon arrival, and deployed to front lines thousands of miles from the factories that built them. By 1944, the United States had produced over 300,000 aircraft, an output unmatched in history. At the height of production, a new plane rolled off the line every 5 minutes. Factories had become engines of war, converting human sweat, skill, and sacrifice into machines that could dominate the skies. Even as planes were lost in battle, new aircraft replaced them with relentless speed, ensuring that the pressure on enemy forces never abated. The combination of quantity, quality, and speed became a weapon in itself, demonstrating the remarkable capacity of American industry. The human stories behind the machines were as compelling as the planes themselves. A young woman riveter, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, would watch a bomber roll off the line and imagine the pilots who would take it into combat, hoping they returned safely. Engineers, knowing the lives that depended on their calculations, double-checked every rivet and engine specification. Factory supervisors navigated immense logistical challenges, coordinating thousands of workers and hundreds of suppliers to keep the assembly lines moving without pause. Each individual effort, though small in isolation, became part of a larger narrative. The story of a nation answering an attack, not just with weapons, but with resilience, determination, and unity. Planes that left the factories went on to transform the battlefields. B-17s and B-24s flew bombing missions over Europe, disrupting supply lines and weakening enemy infrastructure. P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts patrolled skies over both continents, protecting convoys and engaging in dogfights that would determine the outcome of campaigns. In the Pacific, Hellcats and Corsairs provided air cover for island invasions, striking at enemy ships and airfields. Every mission reflected not only military strategy, but the labor of thousands of Americans who had contributed to the creation of each aircraft. The sheer scale of production reshaped American society. Millions were employed in war-related industries. Women took on roles previously denied to them, and the workforce became more diverse and skilled than ever before. Factories, once centers of peacetime production, became temples of ingenuity and sacrifice, where every bolt, rivet, and engine part was a link in a chain stretching from the heart of the United States to the skies above foreign battlefields. By the end of 1942, the United States had fully transformed its industrial capacity. What had once seemed impossible, the rapid creation of vast numbers of complex aircraft, became routine. The country had harnessed its human and material resources in a way that no other nation could match. From the shock of Pearl Harbor rose a force unlike any the world had ever seen, planes built not just with steel, but with courage, determination, and the unyielding spirit of a people committed to defending freedom. The attack on Pearl Harbor had ignited a nation. From its ashes, America rose, not as a victim, but as a producer of thousands of planes, engines, and wings that would dominate the skies and alter the course of history. The story of these machines is inseparable from the story of the people who built them, the men and women whose hands forged wings of steel and hope. Each aircraft, each mission, each factory shift contributed to a larger truth, that even in the face of sudden devastation, human determination could convert tragedy into power, and power into victory. The morning after Pearl Harbor, the country awoke to a new reality. Fear mingled with determination. Across the United States, leaders, engineers, and ordinary citizens understood that the nation could no longer wait. The attack had shown vulnerability, but it had also ignited a resolve unlike any before. Factories that once produced cars, tractors, and household goods would become the engines of war. The streets of Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Wichita began to hum with a different kind of energy. The sound of presses stamping fuselage panels, welding sparks flying like miniature fireworks, and the rhythmic pounding of rivets securing aluminum wings. The United States was transforming itself, and the people within these factories were at the heart of this transformation. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had called the nation to become the arsenal of democracy. a phrase that would guide both policy and industry. The idea was simple but monumental. America would supply not only its own armed forces, but also those of its allies, creating an overwhelming industrial advantage that no enemy could match. From the factories of the Midwest to the shipyards of the Pacific coast, ordinary workers were enlisted in a fight that would span continents. Men and women who had never touched a tool in their lives found themselves learning the intricacies of aircraft assembly, engine calibration, and precision machining. The nation demanded speed and accuracy, and the workforce delivered. Willow Run in Michigan became the emblem of this industrial revolution. The factory, originally designed for automobile production, was repurposed to build the B-24 Liberator bomber, a complex four-engine plane capable of strategic bombing missions. The assembly lines stretched over acres, and thousands of workers moved in synchronized rhythm, each performing a specialized task. One person might fasten the landing gear, while another riveted the fuselage, and a third installed the electrical systems. Every task was a thread in a vast tapestry of human effort. At peak output, Willow Run produced a Liberator every hour, a pace that seemed impossible just months before Pearl Harbor. Engineers optimized every sequence, suppliers shipped parts with military precision, and workers endured long shifts under harsh conditions. Yet there was pride in their labor. Every plane that rolled off the line represented not just metal and machinery, but the hopes of a nation and the promise of justice. Other factories mirrored Willow Run's success. Boeing's plants in Seattle and Renton produced B-17 Flying Fortresses. Lockheed's plants in California produced P-38 Lightnings, and North American Aviation in Inglewood built P-51 Mustangs. Each facility operated like a well-oiled machine, but also like a living organism, dependent on human skill, coordination, and sacrifice. Women comprised a significant portion of the workforce, learning complex assembly techniques that were previously considered the domain of men. The factories were not without their dangers. Aluminum sheets weighed hundreds of pounds, engines were unwieldy, and machinery moved with force capable of severe injury. Yet, the workers adapted. Safety procedures were instituted, but even more important was the unspoken understanding that the planes they built were instruments of survival. The hum of machinery, the hiss of welders, and the clatter of rivets became the heartbeat of a nation at war. The speed of production also demanded innovation. Engineers introduced modular construction techniques, allowing parts to be manufactured in separate locations and assembled quickly. Standardization became critical. Engines, propellers, and fuselage sections had to fit perfectly, even when produced thousands of miles apart. This level of coordination was unprecedented, and it required not only technical skill, but also human dedication. Workers learned to anticipate problems, communicate across departments, and ensure that each aircraft met exacting specifications. Any error could cost lives once the planes reached the battlefield, and the weight of responsibility pressed on every hand that touched a rivet or tightened a bolt. By 1943, the results of America's industrial mobilization were staggering. Tens of thousands of aircraft were leaving the factories each year, far surpassing the combined output of Germany and Japan. The production lines became symbols of hope as much as of power. For the men and women building these planes, the stakes were deeply personal. The human element was everywhere. A young riveter wiping sweat from her brow might glance at the cockpit of a completed B-24 and imagine the missions it would undertake. Engineers tested engines while thinking of the men who would trust their lives to those machines. Supervisors coordinated schedules and materials, with the knowledge that delays could mean fewer planes in the hands of pilots who needed them. The factories were vast, noisy, and exhausting, but within them, a profound sense of purpose thrived. Each worker understood that their efforts were shaping history, that their hands were helping to secure victory. Planes were shipped across oceans to allies as well. Under the Lend-Lease program, thousands of aircraft were sent to Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. Crates arrived at foreign airfields, where they were reassembled and prepared for combat. For American workers, knowing that their labor supported not only their own soldiers, but also those of other nations, added another layer of meaning to each rivet and bolt. The war became a shared endeavor, a global struggle against tyranny, and every plane carried that message into the skies. The relentless pace continued into 1944, when American factories produced more than 95,000 planes in a single year. At Willow Run, Boeing, Lockheed, and North American assembly lines never ceased. Each day saw new planes completed, engines tested, and wings installed. This industrial output became a strategic weapon. The sheer volume of aircraft allowed the Allies to maintain air superiority, replace losses, and carry out bombing campaigns that would cripple enemy infrastructure. Numbers became a weapon as lethal as any bomb, and the factories themselves were battlefields of endurance, precision, and human determination. The lives of factory workers were transformed. Women gained skills that would later translate into long-term careers. Men who had been untrained in industrial work became experts in aircraft construction. Entire communities centered around these factories, with schools, transportation, and social systems adjusting to support the war effort. Children grew up seeing their parents' sacrifices, learning that ordinary labor could have extraordinary consequences. This transformation extended beyond the war itself, reshaping society and laying the groundwork for post-war industrial growth. As the planes rolled off the assembly lines, they carried the essence of the people who built them. Each aircraft represented not just the United States' industrial capacity, but the resolve, skill, and courage of its citizens. From the smoke-filled workshops to the polished runways, the story of these machines was inseparable from the story of the hands that forged them. By turning civilian factories into the arsenal of democracy, the United States created an army not just of soldiers, but of steel and human will, ready to dominate the skies and shape the outcome of a global conflict. The factories were relentless, the work exhausting, and the stakes higher than any previous generation had faced. Yet, through heat, sweat, and exhaustion, America proved that it could convert tragedy into action. From the shock of Pearl Harbor arose a force of ingenuity, labor, and determination, embodied in the thousands of planes that would soon carry the fight across oceans and continents. Every plane told a story of workers who endured, of engineers who solved impossible problems, of a nation unwilling to yield to aggression. From the quiet hum of assembly lines to the thunder of engines taking flight, the United States had found its weapon. Planes built by human hands, rising from the ashes of destruction to change the course of history. By 1943, the roar of American factories had become the heartbeat of a nation at war. From the industrial heartlands of Michigan to the sprawling plants of California, the people who once built cars, tractors, and radios had been transformed into the builders of aircraft, machines that would determine the fate of nations. These factories were enormous, overwhelming in scale, and filled with the constant hum of human effort. Thousands of hands worked in perfect rhythm, each person performing a precise task, yet each one driven by something far greater than assembly instructions. The knowledge that what they built would carry men into battle, and sometimes carry them home again. Women were the most visible symbols of this transformation. They came from small towns, cities, and farms, many having never touched heavy machinery before. Yet in the span of months, they learned to handle rivet guns, weld fuselages, and assemble engines capable of carrying men and bombs across oceans. Some worked 12-hour shifts, their muscles aching, fingers blistered, but pride kept them going. They were called Rosie the Riveter in popular culture, but within the factories, they were individuals with names, families, and dreams, all united by the urgent demand of war. In their sweat and determination, a new generation of women found independence, skill, and purpose. Men who had never operated complex machines before also adapted. Engineers who once designed automobiles now calculated stress tolerances for wing spars and engine mounts. Skilled craftsmen and unskilled laborers alike learned to work in unison, understanding that every bolt tightened, every panel riveted, could mean the difference between life and death once the plane reached the front lines. For many, the factory became a sacred place where personal ambitions were set aside for a higher purpose. The human stories extended beyond the factory floor. Young workers wrote letters to soldiers, imagining the missions their labor would enable. Pilots training in distant fields were aware that the planes they flew were products of countless unseen hands. Each B-17, B-24, or P-51 that took off carried not only fuel and ammunition, but also the collective hope of the people who had built it. The relationship between worker and flyer was intimate, though separated by thousands of miles. The trust in the engineering, the rivets, the engines, and the assembly was absolute. Life inside the factories was exhausting. The air was thick with metallic dust and the smell of heated aluminum. Rivets clanged in a steady rhythm, engines tested in distant bays roared like thunder, and conveyor belts moved with relentless speed. Workers endured fatigue, accidents, and monotony, yet their focus never wavered. They were aware of the stakes. News from Europe and the Pacific filled radios during breaks. Cities bombed, ships sunk, lives lost. Every plane completed, every component checked and approved, was a small victory against the chaos of war. The camaraderie among workers was profound. Teams developed almost familial bonds. They depended on each other's precision, skill, and judgment. A single mistake could delay production or compromise a plane's performance, and everyone understood the weight of responsibility. Mentors trained new workers, passing on techniques honed over thousands of hours. Senior engineers walked the assembly lines daily, offering guidance, encouragement, and correction. In the midst of machinery, sweat, and noise, a community formed, united not by proximity, but by purpose. The scale of the operation was staggering. Factories like Willow Run and Boeing employed tens of thousands of people. Every day, dozens of planes rolled off the lines, each one inspected multiple times before being crated or sent to airfields. The human effort required to sustain this output was extraordinary. People who had never imagined themselves as part of a war effort found their lives transformed. Fathers, mothers, and young adults suddenly responsible for machines that could carry hundreds of lives into combat. Each person became a soldier of industry, their weapons made of aluminum, engines, and wings. For factory workers, every rivet driven carried weight, the knowledge that their labor was inseparable from the lives of men in distant lands. Some nights, exhausted workers dreamed of the skies, imagining the planes soaring over mountains and oceans, guided by the men who trusted their hands. Innovation became essential to maintain the pace. Modular construction, standardized components, and assembly line optimization allowed factories to meet unprecedented output. Yet no machine, however precise, could replace the human element. Workers adjusted on the fly, solved unexpected problems, and ensured that each aircraft met exacting standards. Engineers calculated, tested, and corrected, aware that every miscalculation could be fatal. The relationship between human skill and mechanical precision was absolute, and the scale of this human-machine collaboration was unmatched in history. The planes themselves became symbols. A freshly completed B-24 wasn't merely a bomber. It was a tangible representation of human resilience, ingenuity, and sacrifice. Each engine tested, each rivet hammered, each fuselage polished, carried the hope that America could fight back, that the nation could reclaim the initiative, and that freedom could be preserved. Workers took pride not only in the number of planes produced, but in the quality, knowing that lives would depend on their craftsmanship. The factories also reshaped communities. Towns that hosted massive plants grew rapidly. Housing, schools, transportation, and services expanded to accommodate the influx of workers. Neighbors shared stories of triumph and hardship, of injuries narrowly avoided, of breakthroughs in production that saved hours or days. These communities became microcosms of the national war effort, each person contributing in visible or invisible ways to a collective victory. By late 1943, the scale of America's air production was staggering. Tens of thousands of planes had been built, tested, and deployed. Factories operated at a pace unmatched in history, turning raw materials into machines of war, human skill into strategic power. Every plane carried with it the sweat, courage, and determination of thousands of workers, a testament to the human side of industrial warfare. In these people's hands, aluminum became wings of destiny, engines became heartbeats of freedom, and every rivet became a statement. America would not be broken, and its people would rise from the ashes of Pearl Harbor stronger than ever. The story of these planes was inseparable from the people who built them. From the young women riveting wings to the engineers testing engines. From men who had never touched a machine to veterans overseeing production. The human element defined the American war effort. Each person understood that their labor was more than a job. It was a responsibility, a contribution to a global struggle that would determine the fate of millions. The factories were more than sites of production. They were arenas of human endurance, innovation, and sacrifice. The sound of machinery, the clatter of rivets, and the roar of engines became the soundtrack of a nation mobilized. Workers endured fatigue, injury, and the constant pressure of meeting deadlines, yet they persisted, knowing that each plane completed could save lives and turn the tide of war. By the end of Part 3, America's factories had not only supplied the planes needed for victory, but had also transformed the nation itself. Women gained unprecedented independence and skill. Men discovered the potential of human coordination and ingenuity, and communities found unity in a common purpose. The planes built in these factories were more than tools of war. They were monuments to human effort, courage, and hope, rising from the ashes of Pearl Harbor to carry a nation's determination across the skies of battle. By 1943, the factories of the United States had become veritable armies of steel and aluminum, producing aircraft at a pace never before seen in history. But the true test of these machines was not on the assembly lines. It was in the skies, over the forests of Europe and the islands of the Pacific, where men and women faced the brutal realities of modern war. Each plane that rolled off the line carried with it the hopes, fears, and skill of thousands of workers, and every mission undertaken was a testament to the human and industrial might that had been mobilized in response to Pearl Harbor. Over Europe, the air war was relentless. American bombers, such as the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, flew in formations that stretched for miles, their engines roaring through clouds as they approached heavily defended enemy targets. Cities, factories, and transportation hubs became the focus of precision bombing campaigns designed to cripple the German war machine. Pilots and crews endured flak, fighter attacks, and harsh weather, navigating missions that could last 12 hours or more. The stakes were high, A single mistake could mean death for an entire crew, yet the men knew that the planes they flew were built with care, engineered for endurance, and supported by the hands of countless Americans thousands of miles away. In the skies over Germany, the human element of war was undeniable. Gunners manned their positions, scanning for enemy fighters, hearts pounding with adrenaline. Bombardiers calculated release points with meticulous precision, knowing that success could alter the course of entire campaigns. Pilots, often barely out of their teens, guided their massive aircraft with skill and courage, understanding that every maneuver, every decision was a matter of life and death. The planes themselves were a blend of technology and human trust. They could only achieve their potential when flown by individuals willing to risk everything. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, the air war presented a different set of challenges. The vast expanses of ocean, tropical storms, and remote islands created logistical nightmares. Aircraft such as the F-4U Corsair and the F-6F Hellcat provided crucial support for island-hopping campaigns, protecting naval vessels and ground troops from Japanese air attacks. Pilots faced extreme heat, sudden storms, and the constant threat of enemy interception. Yet the planes they flew, products of American ingenuity and mass production, were up to the task. Each takeoff was a test of both machine and man, and the resilience of the aircraft mirrored the determination of the people who had built them. Losses were inevitable. Many planes never returned from missions, and the human cost was staggering. Letters from families arrived at factories, telling of sons, brothers, and friends who had fallen in combat. These letters reminded the workers that their labor was more than an industrial achievement. It was a lifeline. Every rivet, every engine test, every fuselage assembled carried the weight of human lives. The knowledge that their work could protect soldiers, destroy enemy positions, and influence the course of the war imbued even the most grueling tasks with meaning. In both theaters of war, coordination and logistics were critical. Factories produced planes faster than they could be flown into battle, requiring careful management of supply lines, training programs, and maintenance crews. Airfields became hubs of constant activity, with mechanics, loaders, and ground crews ensuring that aircraft were ready for the next sortie. Each successful mission was a complex dance of human effort, from the assembly line to the cockpit to the sky above, all synchronized to achieve strategic objectives. The impact of American production was transformative. By 1944, the skies were dominated by US aircraft, their sheer numbers overwhelming enemy defenses. Strategic bombing campaigns disrupted supply lines, destroyed key industrial facilities, and forced the German military to divert resources to defend against relentless attacks. Yet behind every successful mission were human stories of courage, fear, and resilience. Pilots faced enemy fire with trembling hands and steadfast hearts, knowing that their planes were the product of thousands of unseen laborers. Crews relied on each other, forging bonds that would endure long after the war ended. Mechanics worked in sweltering conditions, repairing damaged aircraft and ensuring that they could return to combat. Each individual, whether in the air or on the ground, understood that their actions were part of a larger narrative, a story of survival, determination, and the collective will of a nation committed to victory. The planes themselves became symbols of hope and power. B-17s and B-24s, once merely aluminum and steel, now carried the weight of strategy and morale. Mustangs and Thunderbolts patrolled skies with unmatched speed and firepower, striking fear into enemy pilots and offering protection to Allied forces. The planes that soared over Europe and the Pacific were more than instruments of war. They were monuments to human courage, innovation, and resilience. Every takeoff represented countless hours of labor, countless decisions, and countless sacrifices. Pilots, gunners, bombardiers, and ground crews alike understood that they were part of something larger than themselves, a mission that extended beyond the individual, connecting factory floor to front line, civilian to combatant, laborer to pilot. In the end, the story of the skies was the story of America itself. From the shock of Pearl Harbor to the thunder of engines over distant battlefields, the nation had transformed tragedy into triumph. Industrial might had become strategic power, human effort had become a weapon, and planes built by the hands of ordinary citizens had changed the course of history. Every mission, every aircraft, every human story intertwined into a tapestry of sacrifice, courage, and unyielding determination, a testament to what a nation could achieve when its people were united in purpose and guided by resolve. By 1945, the tide of war had shifted irreversibly. The planes that had emerged from American factories now dominated the skies above Europe and the Pacific. The once feared Axis powers were battered, exhausted, and struggling to maintain their hold over occupied territories. The massive output of aircraft, over 300,000 by this point, was no longer just a testament to industrial prowess. It had become the backbone of Allied strategy, enabling victory after victory. Yet, behind each triumphant mission, there was a story of human labor, sacrifice, and determination that had begun years earlier in factories, small towns, and cities across the United States. The soldiers, sailors, and pilots who had flown these planes were now returning home, bringing with them stories of heroism, loss, and resilience. Many spoke of the aircraft as if they were alive, aware that their survival often depended not only on their own skill, but on the care and precision with which the planes had been built. Each mission carried a weight of responsibility, a silent acknowledgement of the thousands of unseen hands that had contributed to every rivet, bolt, and engine test. Pilots remembered the long hours of factory labor that had made their aircraft reliable in the harshest conditions, from the frozen European winters to the scorching Pacific Islands. As the war drew to a close, factories began the process of transition. The deafening roar of assembly lines gradually softened as production shifted from planes to peacetime goods. Yet, the legacy of those factories and the people who worked within them remained profound. Women who had riveted wings and men who had calibrated engines carried new skills into the post-war economy. Communities that had grown around these industrial centers found themselves transformed, having been forged in the fires of war. The collective effort had changed lives, created new opportunities, and reshaped the social fabric of the nation. The final missions of the war were marked by both triumph and tragedy. In the skies over Europe, B-17s and B-24s conducted the last strategic bombing campaigns, crippling remaining enemy infrastructure and hastening the surrender of Germany. P-51 Mustangs and other fighter planes escorted bombers and engaged in dogfights that would decide the fates of cities and soldiers alike. In the Pacific, aircraft carried out decisive strikes on Japanese positions, supported island-hopping operations, and facilitated the surrender of Japanese forces. Each plane that returned safely was a testament to the skill of those who built and maintained it, and each loss was mourned by those who had labored in factories thousands of miles away. The human cost of these final operations was sobering. Pilots, crews, and ground personnel faced danger with courage, yet casualties remained high. Letters continued to arrive at factories, recounting the stories of bravery and sacrifice. Workers who had never left the United States read about the experiences of the men who flew their aircraft into combat, feeling both pride and sorrow. Every rivet and engine carried a human story, a connection between those who built the planes and those who risked their lives in them. The scale of this human networked effort was unmatched, blending industrial power with personal courage. Victory came at last. Germany surrendered in May 1945, followed by Japan in September, after the devastating strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. American aircraft had played an undeniable role in these outcomes, providing the firepower, mobility, and strategic advantage necessary to end the conflict. The skies, that had once been dominated by fear and uncertainty, were now controlled by planes built with precision, skill, and unwavering determination. The United States had turned the shock of Pearl Harbor into a force capable of shaping global events, demonstrating that industrial output, human ingenuity, and collective effort could change the course of history. The post-war period brought both celebration and reflection. Factories that had once been the crucibles of war began producing consumer goods, returning to peacetime roles, but the skills and innovations developed during wartime production persisted. Engineers and workers applied their knowledge to aviation, automotive industries, and emerging technologies, laying the foundation for America's post-war economic boom. Women who had entered the workforce during the war had proven their capabilities, challenging social norms and paving the way for greater equality in the decades to come. The human stories of courage, perseverance, and sacrifice continued to resonate, reminding the nation of the extraordinary efforts that had made victory possible. Monuments and memorials were erected, honoring both the pilots who had flown into battle and the workers who had built the machines that carried them. Museums preserved aircraft, photographs, and artifacts, capturing the scale and impact of America's industrial mobilization. Historians documented the stories of thousands of individuals, recounting the long hours, dangerous conditions, and immense pressure faced by those in factories and on the front lines. The narrative of America's air power became inseparable from the human experiences behind it, creating a lasting legacy that extended far beyond military achievement. The psychological and cultural impact of this mobilization was equally profound. Communities that had rallied around factories and plants developed a deep sense of shared purpose. People who had never imagined themselves contributing to a war effort found that their labor, skill, and ingenuity were crucial to national survival. The experience forged a sense of identity, resilience, and pride that would shape American society for decades. Every plane that soared above battlefields carried with it not only bombs and fuel, but also the hopes, determination, and humanity of those who had built it. In retrospect, the 300,000 aircraft produced during World War II were far more than machines. They were symbols of national unity, industrial innovation, and human courage. Each plane told a story of factory floors filled with sweat, grit, and determination, of women and men mastering skills they had never imagined, of pilots who, trusted in machines built thousands of miles away, and of a nation that, shocked and wounded by the attack on Pearl Harbor, rose to become the dominant air power in the world. The transformation was unprecedented, and the human effort behind it remains a testament to what can be achieved when a country unites in purpose and resolve. Even as the war ended and peace returned, the lessons of these years endured. Industrial capacity became a strategic asset. Workforce diversity and inclusion gained new recognition, and the human stories behind production inspired future generations. From the quiet workshops to the roaring assembly lines, from rivets hammered to engines tested, the human spirit had been expressed in steel and aluminum. The planes built in those years were more than weapons. They were monuments to resilience, ingenuity, and the capacity of ordinary people to achieve extraordinary outcomes. Looking back, it becomes clear that the story of America's planes during World War II is inseparable from the story of its people. The aircraft were tools of war, yes, but they were also embodiments of human dedication, sacrifice, and vision. The final legacy of this effort is enduring. American air power reshaped military strategy, influenced global politics, and demonstrated the unparalleled potential of industrialized societies when guided by human determination. The factories, workers, pilots, and machines together tell a story of courage, innovation, and unity, a story that continues to inspire, reminding the world that even in the darkest hours, human resolve can rise from the ashes, take flight, and change the course of history.